morning of Vivian Beaumont's wedding smelled of cold ash and old regret. She stood at the window of her father's crumbling estate, watching the mist curl between the oak trees like something reluctant to leave. The curtains beside her were frayed at the hem. The floorboards beneath her feet groaned every time she shifted her weight. Even the light coming through the glass had a pale, apologetic quality, as though the sun itself knew better than to shine too brightly on a house this far gone. She was 23 years old. Her father had been dead for 11 months, and in 4 hours she would marry a man she had met exactly once, for 6 minutes, in a lawyer's office that smelled of pipe smoke and sealed fates. Behind her, the sounds of the household rattled on. Dishes clinked. A door slammed on its loose hinges. Somewhere down the hall, her stepmother, Claudette, was already giving orders in that clipped, impatient voice that filled every room and left no space for anything else. "Vivienne, if you are still standing at that window, I swear on your father's grave, I will come in there and dress you myself." Vivienne did not move. She pressed one finger to the cold glass and traced the outline of the gate at the end of the gravel path. She was not waiting for anything. She was only memorizing the shape of the place that had once been home, before debt turned it into a slow disaster. Then she heard it. The sound of wheels. Not the confident roll of a well-maintained carriage. Not the proud clatter of iron on stone. This sound was unsteady and strained, the kind of noise a wagon makes when every bolt is one rut away from giving out. It limped up the long path, pulled by a single horse with a dull coat and a tired gait, and it rattled to a stop before the Beaumont gate with a groan that seemed to come from deep inside the wood itself. The crowd that had gathered along the fence, and there was always a crowd when Beaumont did anything, even fall apart, went very quiet. Then they erupted, laughter first, then whispers, then more laughter, louder, the kind that people do not bother to hide, because they have decided the subject of it does not deserve that courtesy. "Is that his carriage? Good Lord, I thought the Beaumonts were marrying up." Marrying up? That vehicle looks like it was pulled from a ditch. Vivienne watched from the window as the carriage door opened. The man who stepped out was not what she expected. He was tall, the kind of tall that made people involuntarily straighten when he entered a space. His coat was dark, almost black, with slight wear at the cuffs, and his cravat was white and simply knotted. He had dark, curling hair that the morning wind pushed across his forehead, and he did not bother to smooth it back. His jaw was sharp, his posture unhurried, and his eyes, even from this distance, had a quality she could not immediately name. Focused, that was the word. His eyes were extraordinarily focused. He did not look embarrassed by the carriage. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at the house, slowly, deliberately, the way a man looks at something he has been thinking about for a long time. And then, as if he felt her watching, he looked directly up at her window. Vivienne stepped back. Her heart did something she was not expecting. Not a flutter. She was not a woman who fluttered. It was something quieter, a settling, as if a part of her that had been braced for a long time had just, without permission, relaxed. She did not understand it. She did not trust it. She turned from the window, picked up her father's ledger from the writing desk, the one his lawyer had pressed into her hands the morning after the funeral, the one she had not yet found the courage to open fully, and tucked it beneath her arm. Whatever this marriage was, whatever this man was, she was walking into it with the only thing her father had left her, the truth, sealed in ink, waiting to be understood. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. 3 weeks before the wedding, Vivienne had sat in Mr. Alderton's law office on Harwick Street and listened to the entire shape of her future being rearranged in under an hour. The office was small and smelled of dust and old leather. Mr. Alderton, who had served the Beaumont family for 30 years, sat behind his desk with the expression of a man delivering news he had been dreading. He had kind eyes and no skill at hiding what he felt. which was perhaps why Vivian had always liked him. Beside her, Claudette sat in rigid silence, her gloved hands folded in her lap, her face arranged into an expression of dignified suffering that she had clearly rehearsed. "The estate's debts," Mr. Alderton began, shuffling his papers, "exceed its assets by a margin that is no longer recoverable through the standard means available to the family." Vivian already knew this. She had known it for months. She had watched the household shrink. First the footman, then the cook, then the horses except one. She had known before her father died that the Beaumont name was running on borrowed light. "However," Mr. Alderton said, and the word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, "a proposal has been made." Claudette's composure cracked just enough to show interest beneath it. "A proposal," she repeated. "By whom?" "Duke Adrian Mercer, of Stonebridge. He has agreed to assume all outstanding debts of the Beaumont estate, in full, in exchange for a marriage contract with Miss Vivienne Beaumont." The room went very still. Vivian set down the glass of water she had been holding and placed it carefully on the edge of the desk. "Stonebridge," she said. "I am not familiar with that title. It is not widely publicized, miss. The Duke keeps a low profile, and yet he knows of me. He made specific inquiries. He has been aware of your family's circumstances for some time." There was something in the way Mr. Alderton said that. Not uncomfortable exactly, more like careful. Vivian filed it away. Claudette leaned forward. "What are his assets? What are the terms beyond the debt settlement?" "The terms are clear, Mrs. Beaumont. The estate is settled, the debts cleared. Miss Vivian takes the Duke's name. Beyond that, the Duke has stipulated only one additional condition, which is that the ledger currently in Miss Vivian's possession, the one left to her by her late father, be kept by her, and that she be given the opportunity to study it fully before handing it over to any third party, including the Duke himself." Vivian's hand moved, almost involuntarily, toward the satchel at her feet, where the ledger sat sealed in brown paper. "He knows about the ledger," she said. "Yes, miss, and he wants me to read it before he has it. That appears to be his position." She looked at the window, the ledger, the window again. A man she had never met was arranging her entire future, clearing her family's debt, and yet his one condition was not about money or property. It was about a book of numbers that she had barely looked at. That was either the most generous thing she had ever heard, or the most calculated. She suspected it was both. "When do I meet him?" "He arrives in 3 weeks. The wedding is set for the morning following his arrival." Claudette made a sound of protest. "That is practically no time at all. Surely we can negotiate." "The terms are not subject to negotiation, Mrs. Beaumont." Vivian stood. "Then I agree," she said simply. Claudette looked at her with the particular expression of a woman who had expected more of a fight and was irritated not to get one. Vivian walked out of the office with the ledger tucked under her arm and the quiet certainty that she had just agreed to something much larger than a marriage. On the carriage ride home, the old Beaumont carriage, which at least still had its wheels, Claudette spoke without looking at her. "You are making a mistake. A man who offers to clear debts without demanding a detailed accounting of the assets he is acquiring is either a fool or hiding something. Or he simply wants something that money cannot quantify," Vivian said. "In my experience, everything has a price." Vivian watched the countryside roll past and said nothing. She thought about the ledger. She thought about the way Mr. Alderton's voice had gone careful when he mentioned the Duke's awareness of their circumstances. She thought about a man who had sought her out specifically, not her beauty, not her name, not whatever remained of the Beaumont social standing. Her, whatever that meant. She opened the ledger that night by candlelight and read the first page. The numbers did not make sense to her yet, but the handwriting was her father's, and it covered every line of every page, and at the very end, on the last sheet, there was a single sentence written in ink, so dark it had bled slightly through the paper. "Find the Duke before they do." The wedding ceremony itself was brief. The vicar read the words. Vivian said the ones required of her. Duke Adrian standing at the altar in that same worn coat, with that same unhurried certainty, said this with a quiet steadiness that made the vicar look up briefly, as if surprised by the lack of nerves. There was no feast arranged. The Beaumont estate could not afford it, and the Duke had not requested one. The guests, mostly neighbors who had come to witness the spectacle, and a handful of Beaumont family friends who arrived out of loyalty rather than hope, milled about the courtyard afterward with tepid wine and louder opinions. She has married a man without a carriage worth riding in. They say his estate is practically in ruins. I heard it from Lady Weston herself. Poor girl. All that composure, and for what? Vivian heard every word. She stood near the gate in her mother's repurposed wedding gown, sage green silk with cream embroidery along the bodice, chosen because it was the only fine thing left in the house that still fit properly, and she did not flinch. She was used to being discussed. She had never found a reason to let it alter her posture. It was when she turned to find her husband standing 3 feet away, hands clasped behind his back, observing the crowd with the patient expression of someone watching weather pass, that she realized he too had heard all of it. He was not angry. He was not embarrassed. He looked, if anything, mildly interested. "They are not subtle," Vivienne said. "They never are," Adrian replied. "That is precisely why they are useful." She turned to look at him properly. Up close, the wear on his coat was more visible. A small repair at the right cuff, done neatly, but not invisibly. His boots were clean, but scuffed. His cravat was correct, but plain. Everything about him said modest means, and yet his hands were still, his shoulders were level, and when the crowd's laughter peaked again at some new comment about the carriage, his jaw did not tighten, his eyes did not shift. A man embarrassed by poverty does not stand like that. "You are playing a role," she said. "Not a question." He looked at her then directly, without hurry. "What makes you say that? The coat is deliberate, so is the carriage. A man who did not care about his appearance would not have pressed the coat before wearing it. A man who could not afford better would not have kept the boots polished. You are dressed like someone who has chosen this, not someone trapped in it." A pause. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "You have your father's eyes for detail," he said quietly. The words landed differently than she expected. Not flattery, something more like acknowledgement. "You knew my father," she said. "I knew of him. I knew what was done to him." Before she could ask what that meant, Claudette swept in, with the crisp efficiency of a woman who had been hovering at the edge of the conversation for exactly as long as her patience allowed. "The carriage is ready, Your Grace, whenever you and Vivienne wish to depart," she said. "Your Grace," the way one might say a word in a foreign language carefully, as if tasting it for the first time. Adrian gave a brief nod. "We leave in 10 minutes. The journey to Stonebridge took 4 hours. The carriage was exactly as bad inside as it looked from the outside. The seat cushions had lost most of their stuffing. The windows did not close fully, so the autumn air came through in small, persistent streams. Every rut in the road sent a shudder through the whole frame, and at least twice Vivian was certain they would need to stop for repairs. But they did not stop. The driver, a wiry older man with a sun-weathered face and a set of shoulders like a doorframe, handled the horse with quiet competence, and the carriage, for all its complaints, held. Adrian sat across from Vivian. He had removed his hat and set it on the seat beside him. In the muted light of the carriage interior, she could see his face more clearly, the dark eyes with fine lines at the corners that suggested he was older than she'd first estimated, mid-30s perhaps, the jaw that carried a day's worth of shadow, the particular stillness of his hands, resting loose on his knees. He was reading. She had not seen him produce a book, but there it was, a slim, well-worn volume, held at an angle to catch what light the windows allowed. "You are not going to explain yourself," she said. "Not an accusation, simply an observation." "Not yet," he said, without looking up. "Is there a timeline I should be aware of?" There is a great deal I intend to tell you, but some of it will be clearer once you have had time to finish reading the ledger. She looked at her satchel, where the ledger sat. You are counting on what I find in it. I am counting on you to understand it, he said. And now he did look up, and his eyes in that moment were very direct. There is a difference. Anyone can find what is written there. Understanding it requires knowing what to look for and why it matters. I believe you are capable of that. I would not have arranged this otherwise. The carriage hit a rut. Vivian caught the door handle. When she straightened, she asked the question she had been holding since the law office. My father's last note said to find the Duke before they do. Who are they? Adrian closed the book. People who believe the contents of that ledger give them power over me, he said. They are wrong, but they are also dangerous, and they have had 11 months since your father's death to act on that belief. Then we are already behind. No, he said, with a calm that was not coldness, but something closer to certainty. They think we are. That is not the same thing. Vivian looked out the window at the passing countryside, the hedgerows thick with late autumn color, the farmhouses with their smoking chimneys, the roads that narrowed as they moved further from the city. She was married to a man she had known for 5 hours. She was carrying a ledger she only half understood, and somewhere ahead of them, people who had done something to her father were waiting to find out how much she knew. She found, to her own surprise, that she was not afraid. She was something sharper than afraid. She was ready. She had expected ruins. When Adrian had said Stonebridge, she had assembled in her mind the kind of estate that matched his presentation. Crumbling stonework, vines reclaiming the walls, a house that had given up on itself the same way the carriage had. She had prepared herself for it. She had decided she would not let it matter. She was not prepared for what she saw instead. The carriage passed through a set of iron gates, old gates, yes, with age on them, but set into a stone wall that was solid and deliberate. The path beyond curved through an avenue of linden trees, and at the end of that avenue sat a house that was the opposite of everything she had braced for. Stonebridge was large, not showy large, not the kind of estate built to make people feel small when they approached it. It was large in the way of something that had been expanded carefully over generations, each addition considered rather than impressive. The stonework was original and dark with age, but it was intact. The windows were tall and clean. The grounds around the house were not manicured into the kind of formal geometry fashionable estates preferred. They were wilder, greener, with old oaks standing where they had always stood, and beds of late autumn herbs growing in unruly clusters near the entrance. It looked, Vivian thought, like a house that was being lived in, actually lived in, not performed in. She stepped out of the carriage and stood in the last of the day's light, looking up at it. It is not what you expected, Adrian said beside her. Not a question. No, she admitted. It is what I intended, he said. The door opened before they reached it. A woman appeared compact, grey-haired, with the posture of someone who had been managing households for longer than some people had been alive. She wore a dark dress and a calm expression, and she looked at Vivian with neither judgment nor excessive warmth, simply a frank and steady assessment. Your Grace. Miss forgive me, Your Grace, she corrected herself, addressing Vivian directly now. I am Mrs. Holt. I manage the house. Your rooms have been prepared. Thank you, Mrs. Holt, Vivian said. The interior of Stonebridge was the ledger made physical. She thought that later, after she had been shown to her rooms and had time to move through the corridors on her own, every hallway had bookshelves, not decorative bookshelves, not the kind filled with matched sets chosen for their spines. These were working shelves, books stacked horizontally because there was no room to stand them upright, books with markers in them, books that had been repaired and rebound, maps pinned to boards beside the shelves, letters in organized stacks, ledgers, dozens of them arranged by year, on shelves labeled with small brass plates. In the room Adrian called the study, which was in truth more of an archive, spanning two large connected rooms on the ground floor. She stopped and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "You are not a poor man," she said. "No. You are an extremely rich man who has taken considerable trouble to appear otherwise." "Yes. For how long?" 3 years. She turned to look at him. "And in those 3 years, what have you been trying to find?" "Evidence," he said, "of what was taken from my family, and by whom, and how. The ledger your father left you is the last piece. It is not a debt record. It is a map. I believe your father knew that. I believe that is why he made sure it went to you, and not to the estate." She looked at the satchel still in her hands. "He said to find the Duke before they do. He knew about you. He discovered the conspiracy before I did. He came to me, once, but I was not ready to trust him. I was wrong about that. By the time I understood what he was trying to tell me, he was gone." The room was quiet. The fire in the grate behind her put warmth along her back. She thought about her father, not the sick man at the end, not the debtor, but the man before all that. Precise, careful, deeply private. A man who kept his own counsel and left his most important words in the pages of a book he sealed and gave to his daughter. "He trusted me with it," she said. "Not to Adrian, to herself. He trusted you to know what to do with it," Adrian said quietly. "That is a different and larger thing." She opened the satchel. She took out the ledger. She sat down at the large oak table in the center of the archive and opened it to the first page. "Then we had better start," she said. Adrian sat down across from her, produced a second ledger of his own, she would learn, the one he had spent 3 years filling in, and opened it to a marked page. They worked until the candles burned low. Outside, England went on in the dark, entirely unaware that in this room, 2 people were quietly beginning to take apart the machinery of a very old and very profitable crime. The more she read, the more it became a different book. At first glance, her father's ledger was exactly what it appeared to be. Columns of numbers, dates, names, transaction amounts. The kind of record a careful man keeps when he wants to know where every coin goes and comes from. She had seen such records her whole childhood. Her father at his desk in the evenings, the scratch of his pen, the measured way he turned each page. But as she worked through it, cross-referencing with Adrian's notes, a pattern emerged that had nothing to do with the Beaumont household accounts at all. The names in the margins were not tradespeople or staff. They were landowners, solicitors, 2 members of Parliament, a shipping company registered out of Bristol that she had never heard of, but that Adrian could name without hesitation, Aldgate Maritime, a company that existed on paper, moved significant sums of money through its accounts, and was owned beneath 3 layers of business names by Lord Edmund Sterling. "Sterling," she said. "Lord Sterling, who sits on the Crown's Financial Committee. The same. And this money moving through Aldgate is going where?" "Away from where it is supposed to be," Adrian said. "My family's properties generated significant income from Crown-backed agricultural contracts. That income was redirected over a period of 7 years. The contracts were quietly reassigned to companies connected to Sterling while my father was ill and I was away. By the time I understood what had been done, the paper trail had been altered. But my father found it. Your father audited the original contracts for another client and recognized the discrepancy. He recorded what he found here, in this ledger, in a way that was designed to look like personal accounts. If anyone found it before you or I could use it, they would see numbers. We see names." Vivienne traced a finger down a column of figures. Numbers. Just numbers. But her father had also written the names in a cipher she had cracked on the second day at Stonebridge. He had used her mother's maiden name as the key, a name that no one outside the immediate family would think to look for, a name chosen with love and used for protection. She felt the weight of what her father had done settle over her, the care of it, the precision, the cost. He had known the risk of holding this information. He had carried it anyway. He had paid for it, she suspected now, in more ways than just the family's declining fortune. Was my father's death, was it? I do not have proof, Adrian said, and the care in how he chose those words was its own kind of answer. But I have reasons not to consider it straightforward. She was quiet for a long moment. The fire had settled to embers. The study was warm and still. Outside, the grounds of Stonebridge were silver with moonlight. Then we are not simply recovering your family's assets, she said. We are exposing something that men with power over courts and parliament have worked very hard to bury. Yes, and if we fail, we will not fail, he said, and there was no bluster in it. It was simply stated, the way someone states something they have thought about thoroughly. But it will require patience, and it will require them to believe, right up until the moment we act, that I am still a man without resources or recourse. She understood then why the carriage was what it was. Why the coat? Why the careful performance of modest means? Adrian was not hiding his wealth out of eccentricity. He was hiding it the way a chess player hides a piece out in the open, disguised as something worth nothing, waiting for the right moment.
Who else knows? She asked. Mrs. Holt, my driver, Harrow.
You, now. 3 people. 4, he said. Your father knew. He simply is no longer here to be counted. She looked at the ledger, then at Adrian. Then we are 4, she said, and we had better be enough. The weeks that followed had a shape that Vivian had not expected. She had anticipated stiffness, the awkward adjustment of 2 strangers learning to share a house without the benefit of having chosen each other in the ordinary way. She had prepared for polite distance, measured meals, and careful silences. What she found instead was a rhythm. Mornings, Adrian rode the estate, not from idleness, but from calculation, checking fences and fields, making note of what was visible from the road, managing the outward appearance of a struggling property with the same attention he applied to everything else. Vivienne spent those hours in the archive, cross-referencing dates and names, building on the map her father had begun. In the evenings, they ate together in the small dining room off the kitchen, not the formal dining hall, which had been closed for 3 years as part of the performance, and talked through what she had found. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes past midnight. He was not easy, exactly. He was exacting, careful with words, slow to praise, and quicker to push back on assumptions. But he listened, truly listened, in the way of someone who understood that listening was its own kind of intelligence. She found herself looking forward to the evenings. She noted this, filed it away, did not examine it too closely, not yet. The first test of the masquerade came in the 3rd week. An invitation arrived from Sir Geoffrey Wentworth, a neighbour whose land bordered Stonebridge's eastern edge, for a small supper gathering. The note was friendly in its phrasing and pointed in its content. He hoped the Duke and his new wife were settling comfortably, and that he might be of assistance if the estate required any of the management guidance he had to offer, given his own considerable experience with such matters. Vivian read it twice. He wants to know how bad it is, she said. He is reporting to someone who wants to know how bad it is, Adrian corrected. Sterling. Wentworth is not sophisticated enough to be Sterling's man directly. He is a link in a chain. He sees what he sees and repeats it. Our job is to give him the right things to see and repeat. They attended the supper. Adrian wore the coat. Vivian wore her second-best gown, deliberately second-best. She left the good earrings at home and wore a simpler pair, the kind a woman wears when she is making do. The table was 8 people, the Wentworths, 2 other neighbouring couples, and with a timing that felt less than accidental, a woman named Lady Beatrice Hollis, who had travelled from London and who regarded Vivian with the particular attention of someone conducting an interview while pretending to make conversation. Lady Beatrice was perhaps 50, elegant in the deliberate way of a woman who had spent decades cultivating a specific impression. She wore deep burgundy silk and a necklace of garnets that caught the candlelight, and she spoke in the murmuring, gentle tones of someone who understood that being underestimated was often a useful thing. Your Grace, she said to Vivian. She did not address Adrian directly all evening. Vivian noted, I do hope the transition has not been too difficult. Stonebridge is a lovely property, or it was, in its time. In its time, 2 words doing the work of a small knife. It is lovely now, Vivian said pleasantly. I have been finding it quite full of surprises. How charming. And the Duke is full of surprises? Vivian smiled. Not warmly. Precisely. Constantly, she said. Across the table, Adrian was speaking quietly to Sir Geoffrey about crop rotation. He looked bored. He looked like a man whose estates were underperforming and who was trying not to show it. He looked exactly like what they needed him to look like. Lady Beatrice asked, with the ease of someone who had done this many times. I wonder if you find the isolation difficult. London is so much livelier, of course. And your husband seems to forgive me, not the sort inclined toward social visibility. I have never needed liveliness from the people around me, Vivian replied. I have always found that a man who listens well is worth a dozen who simply talk. A beat. Beatrice tilted her head. How sensible. And practical given the circumstances. Given any circumstances, Vivian said simply. The supper ended pleasantly enough. On the carriage ride home, a different carriage, borrowed for the evening, which had been Adrian's small concession to the fiction she was quietly processing. Lady Beatrice, she said finally. She was there to assess you. She was there to recruit me, Vivian corrected. She thinks I am an unhappy wife. She wanted to find out if I am manageable. Adrian looked at her. And how would you like to play it? I will be manageable, she said. Just enough. Just long enough for her to bring me closer. He said nothing for a moment. Then, you are very good at this. I grew up in a house with Claudette, she said. I have been reading the room since I was 12. Lady Beatrice called on Vivian the following Tuesday. She brought flowers, a fashionable and slightly excessive arrangement of late autumn blooms, and the kind of conversation that starts broad and gentle and narrows gradually toward its real purpose. She spoke of London, of society, of the difficulties faced by women who found themselves in marriages that did not, and here she paused, selecting her word with care to fulfill their original expectations. Vivian listened. She poured tea. She allowed her expression to carry just enough tired resignation to be convincing. It cannot be easy, Beatrice said softly. A woman of your intelligence and background, tied to a situation so reduced. I hope you know there are people who think of you, who would help you, if you needed it. Help me how? Vivian asked, as if the question were innocent. Position, comfort, a return to the kind of life you deserve. And what would such help require of me? Beatrice set down her teacup. Very little, only that you keep us informed about the estate, about your husband's movements, about any documents you might come across in your daily management of the household. Vivian looked at her hands. Documents, she repeated. Old records, correspondence, the kind of administrative paperwork that accumulates in old houses. Nothing significant, only things that might help us understand the estate's situation. She was asking for the ledger. She did not know she was asking for the ledger. She only knew there was something at Stonebridge that her employer wanted, and that the wife was the softest point of entry. Vivian picked up her teacup. I will bear it in mind, she said pleasantly. It is kind of you to think of me. Lady Beatrice smiled. It did not reach her eyes. After she left, Vivian sat alone in the drawing room for a moment. The flowers were still on the table. They were very pretty. They smelled faintly of something sweet and cut. She picked them up, carried them to Adrian's study, and set them on his desk. She wants the ledger, she said, which means Sterling knows it exists and does not yet know where it is. We have more time than I thought. Adrian looked at the flowers. Did she actually believe you? Enough to come back, Vivian said, which is all we need. By the 5th week of their marriage, Vivian had developed a clear picture of the conspiracy her father had died carrying. It was not a rushed thing. It had not been assembled in haste or desperation. It was the kind of scheme that grew over years, built by patient men who understood that the safest way to steal is slowly, in small enough quantities that no one person sees the whole shape of it. Sterling had been on the Crown's Financial Committee for 9 years. During that time, 15 royal land contracts, agricultural, timber, and canal rights had been quietly reassigned to companies he controlled through intermediaries. The total sum redirected over those 9 years was, by Adrian's painstaking calculation, somewhere in excess of £200,000. The mechanism was elegant. The original contract holders, including Adrian's father, had been approached with offers to sell, or had been maneuvered out through legal disputes, manufactured for the purpose, or had simply found that their renewals did not come through, year after year, until they assumed the contracts were done and moved on. No single removal was suspicious enough to investigate. Together, they formed a pattern that pointed at one man. The problem was that the only surviving record of the original contracts, the one that named all the holders and the dates of reassignment in enough detail to prove the redirect, was the ledger. Vivienne's father had compiled it by going back to the original Crown records, cross-referencing with shipping and banking documents, and piecing together what had been made deliberately obscure. He had done it quietly, over 2 years, and he had done it alone, and someone had found out. She knew this now, because of a single entry near the back of the ledger, the only entry not written in her father's careful hand, but in a different script, hurried and uneven, as though written quickly under pressure. It said only, "They know. Get it to the Duke." Her father had not written that. Someone else had. Someone who had known about the ledger, had known about Adrian, and had understood that if the book was found on her father's person, it was already too late. She showed it to Adrian on the evening of the 35th day of their marriage. He read it twice, put the ledger down, stood at the window for a long moment. "My man at the Crown Registry," he said. "He died 2 months after your father. I was told it was a fever." "Was it?" "I no longer know what I was told." She watched him stand there, the line of his back, the controlled stillness of him that was not coldness, but rather the particular composure of someone who has learned to hold a great deal without letting it break him. She had wondered, in those first weeks, what lay beneath the careful surface. She was beginning to understand. Not coldness, the opposite of coldness. A fire banked very low, held very steady, because losing control of it would burn everything down. "Adrian!" she said. He turned. "We are going to get it," she said. "All of it. Names, evidence, proof. And we are going to do it correctly, so there is no way to dismiss it or bury it." He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not relief exactly. Closer to recognition. "I know," he said. The same evening, a message arrived from Lady Beatrice. It was worded delicately, but its meaning was direct. Sterling was coming to the county. He would be attending the winter solstice ball hosted by the Wentworths in 3 weeks. It was expected, and here the phrasing went carefully, that the Duke of Stonebridge and his wife would attend. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. Vivienne read it and passed it to Adrian without comment. He read it, set it down. "The winter solstice ball," he said. "He wants to see you in person. He wants to judge for himself how vulnerable the situation is. He wants to see if I can be managed," Adrian said. "The same way Beatrice came to see if you could be managed." "Then we give him what he came to see," Vivienne said, "and prepare everything else while he is looking." Adrian picked up the message again. His expression was not exciting. It was the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time for the correct moment, and has just been told it is 3 weeks away. 3 weeks, he said. "Enough time?" "Barely. Then we start tonight," she said. There was a place in the eastern fields of Stonebridge, beyond the old mill, and through a stand of ash trees, where the land dipped down into a natural hollow. Adrian called it the low ground. He said his father had called it the same thing, and his father's father before that. It was where the original Crown contracts had been surveyor marked when the estate was first granted. And it was where, 3 years ago, Adrian had buried a copy of the original documentation. He had told no one. He had done it at night, alone, in early spring before the ground hardened, and he had covered the site so carefully that he even needed to use a compass bearing from the mill to find it again. He had been waiting for a reason to go back for it. He had not wanted to move it until he had the rest of the evidence in place. Moving it too soon risked losing it. Moving it too late risked the same. The ledger had changed the calculation. He had everything now, or nearly. But the buried documentation was the final piece of the original contracts, in their unaltered form, signed by the Crown's own representative, and dated 7 years before Sterling's reassignments. Without them, the ledger was damning but arguable. With them, it was inarguable. He told Vivienne this on a cold Sunday morning, 2 weeks before the ball. She looked at him. "When do we go?" "Tonight. I go alone. It is safer." "I am going with you," she said. "Vivienne, I know the ledger. I know the cipher my father used. If anything in that box needs to be cross-referenced on site in the dark, I am faster at it than you are. We go together." He looked at her for a long moment. "Have you ever ridden at night?" "I grew up on a failing estate," she said. "I have done most things out of necessity." They left at midnight. Harrow saddled 2 horses, the old estate horses, quieter and steadier than the carriage horse, and stood at the stable door, watching them go, with the expression of a man who had learned a long time ago not to ask questions about what the Duke did at night. The ride across the fields was cold and dark and still, the kind of still that belongs only to the very late hours, when even the animals have gone quiet. The moon was 3/4 full and high, which was both useful and a risk. It lit the path. It also meant they were visible. Adrian rode slightly ahead, navigating by memory. Vivienne matched his pace, her cloak wrapped close, the ledger in the saddlebag. They did not speak on the ride out. The silence between them had changed over the weeks. It was not the silence of strangers anymore. It had room in it. It was the silence of 2 people who have learned each other's rhythms well enough that words are only needed when they are actually needed. At the mill, Adrian stopped and took a bearing. Then they rode into the ash trees and down into the low ground. He dismounted. She did too. He walked 23 paces east of a particular stone, knelt, and began to clear the ground with his hands. She held a shielded lantern low, directed down, and watched. The box was oilskin wrapped, the size of a small volume, and when he lifted it free of the earth, she saw his hands go briefly still before he opened it. Inside, papers. 12 pages of closely printed text, official crown seals at the top of each, dated, signed, complete. She took the first page and held it next to the lantern and the ledger, cross-referencing the contract numbers. "They match," she said, and her voice was very quiet. "Every single one. The numbers in my father's ledger correspond to the original contract identifiers here. Sterling's companies were assigned contracts that legally belonged to Stonebridge and 11 other estates. All of them," Adrian said. "All of them." He sat back on his heels in the low ground. Above them, the ash trees moved in a light wind, silver and dark and silent. The moon was overhead. She watched him in the lantern light. This man who had spent 3 years building a case alone, who had dressed in worn coats and ridden in a broken carriage and kept his wealth hidden in stone rooms, while the people who had taken from his family walked free in silk and title. She felt something shift in her, the final repositioning of something she had been careful not to look at directly since that first day at the window. It was not gratitude. It was not an admiration. It was something that had been building every evening at the archive table, every late meal, every moment of silence that had room in it. Something she recognized now, belatedly, as the one thing she had not been bracing herself for. "You should have told me all of this at the beginning," she said softly. "I know. Why didn't you?" He looked at her. In the low light of the lantern, she could see him considering not stalling, but choosing the precise truth rather than the easy version of it. "Because I chose you for your integrity," he said, "and I needed to know if my judgment of it was correct before I trusted you with everything. I would have been asking you to take a very great risk on the word of a stranger. And now? Now I know my judgment was not wrong. The wind moved through the ash trees. She looked at the documents in her hands, then at him. For what it's worth, she said, neither was mine. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and took the papers from her hands carefully, deliberately, and tucked them back into the oilskin with the same deliberate care he applied to everything. When he stood, he offered her his hand to help her up from the cold ground. She took it. He did not let go immediately, and she did not pull away. And in the hollow field beneath the ash trees with the lantern burning between them, something settled between them that was not spoken and did not need to be. They rode home in the same silence as before, but it was a different silence now. 5 days before the winter solstice ball, Adrian showed her the vault. She had not known there was a vault. She had known about the archive, 2 rooms of documents and records and maps. She had known about the library on the 2nd floor, which contained, by her estimate, more than 3,000 volumes. She had known about the ledger room off the east corridor, where every financial record of the Stonebridge estate, going back 200 years, was stored in ordered sequence. She had not known about the room below the library. Access was through a section of shelving that moved on a concealed pivot. She had walked past it dozens of times without noticing, and when Adrian pressed the specific sequence of books that released the catch, she made a sound that was very nearly undignified. "How long have you had this?" "The room has been here since the house was built," he said. "The concealment was added by my grandfather. He had strong opinions about privacy. The room below was small, perhaps 12 feet by 10, and it smelled of beeswax and old paper, and something metallic she identified, after a moment, as a coin. There were 3 chests against the far wall, open, full. She stood at the entrance and looked at them. Gold coin, notes of value, bonds and titles and letters of credit from banks she recognized as among the oldest and most established in England. A quantity of wealth that sat quietly in a room below a library and asked no one to acknowledge it. "This is what was saved," Adrian said. "What my father had already converted and secured before the properties were taken. It is enough, if used correctly, to restore everything, but it cannot be used until the legal situation is resolved. Using it before the case is established would give Sterling's counsel grounds to argue that I obtained these funds through improper means. So you have sat on this for 3 years. Yes, while wearing a coat with a repaired cuff. The cuff was repaired by Mrs. Holt, who finds visible wear offensive. She could not be stopped. Despite everything, she laughed. It came out unexpectedly, genuine, and his expression shifted in response to a warmth that had been sitting just below the surface of him finally making it to his face. She had not seen him look like that before. Not quite like that. She looked away at the chests. "After the ball," she said, "if everything goes as planned, what happens to all of this? The properties are legally returned to Stonebridge. The Crown recovers its redirected funds. The appropriate parties are held accountable. And us?" A pause. She felt it. The particular weight of that word. Not planned. Not calculated. Just real. And out there now. "That," Adrian said, "would depend on what you want." She turned to look at him. "I want what is true," she said. "I want to stay." He was very still for a moment. Then he walked the 3 steps between them and took both her hands in his, and the gesture was unhurried and certain, and entirely without performance. "Then stay," he said. She had married a stranger 6 weeks ago in a borrowed gown, with a father's last gift tucked under her arm, surrounded by people who laughed at them. She had expected a transaction, an arrangement, something with clear edges and manageable expectations. She had not expected this man. She had not expected these evenings in the archive, this silence that had room in it, this cold field under ash trees, his hand on hers in the lamplight. She had not expected to feel, for the first time in years, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. He brought his forehead down to hers gently, without hurry, and kissed her and they stood in that small room beneath the library, with centuries of documented wealth around them, and it was nothing like what the ledgers recorded, and everything like what her father's last words had meant. "Find the Duke before they do," she had. The Wentworth estate on the night of the winter solstice ball was the most expensive room in the county, and everyone in it knew it, and wanted you to know it too. Candles in every window, a string quartet in the east salon, tables dressed in white linen with centerpieces of hothouse flowers forced into bloom out of season at considerable expense. The guests arrived in their finest silks and velvets and jewels that had been brought out of cases for the occasion, and the conversation was the kind that glitters on the surface and sharpens underneath. Lord Edmund Stirling arrived at 9 o'clock. He was 60, heavy-set, with the particular confidence of a man who had spent decades being deferred to. He wore his authority like his coat, correctly, expensively, without apology. He worked the room with the ease of a host, though it was not his house greeting, clasping hands, distributing attention in measured amounts. When he saw Adrian, his expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. Vivian saw it from across the room. She was wearing the green gown, the real one, the one she had saved. Her hair was up, and she wore the emerald earrings that had been in the vault, which no one in this room had ever seen on her, and which were, by themselves, worth more than the entire contents of the Wentworth dining room. She had chosen them deliberately, a single, quiet signal. Adrian had not dressed down tonight. He wore black, well-cut, correct, understated rather than poor, and the effect was the opposite of everything people had come to expect from him. He looked precisely like what he was, a man of complete authority who had simply been choosing, until now, not to show it. Lady Beatrice found Vivian first. "You look well," she said, and then her eyes caught the earrings, and her expression tightened. "Thank you," Vivian said. "It is a good evening for clarity, I think." Stirling crossed the room toward them. He greeted Vivian with practiced warmth, a bow, a compliment on the earrings that he framed as innocent admiration, but was clearly a question. Then he turned to Adrian with the expression of a man who is accustomed to finding opponents diminished, and is mildly annoyed to find this one standing steadily. "Mercer," he said, "I have heard a great deal about you." "And I about you," Adrian replied pleasantly. "Lord Stirling, your work on the Crown Financial Committee has been thorough." The word landed. Stirling's eyes did not change. "I hope the estate is recovering. I understand you've had a difficult few years." "On the contrary," Adrian said, "we have had a very productive few years." Stirling looked between him and Vivian. Then, with the smooth confidence of a man who has done this before and gotten away with it, he smiled. "I hear you've been going through old papers. Estate business. I imagine it must be quite a tangle." "It has been," Adrian agreed, "although I am pleased to say the tangle is now considerably sorted." The moment came at 11 o'clock. Stirling had maneuvered toward the center of the room. Vivian could see the coordination of it, the way Beatrice had quietly positioned certain guests, the way Wentworth had begun to withdraw slightly, as if anticipating what was coming and not wanting to be near it. A man she did not recognize had been moving quietly along the edge of the room for an hour. He positioned himself near the door at 10:45 and produced, at 11 exactly, a document that Stirling received and held up with the ease of someone delivering a planned announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stirling said, and the room quieted, such was the authority of the man. That conversation stopped simply because he chose to speak. "I apologize for the interruption to the evening, but a matter of some urgency has come to my attention. It concerns this estate and its management." He held up the document. "I have here, verified by 3 witnesses, a set of accounts demonstrating that the Duke of Stonebridge has been diverting Crown funds allocated to his estate's renovation. The committee has been notified, and the appropriate process of—" "I think," Adrian said, clearly and without raising his voice, "you have the wrong document." The room did not breathe. Stirling turned to look at him. Adrian walked to the center of the room and stood across from Stirling, with the unhurried certainty of someone who has been here, in this moment, in this conversation, 1,000 times in his preparation. He reached into his coat. He produced a document, not one folded set of papers, secured with ribbon and a seal that several people in the room recognized immediately. The Crown's own seal, deep red and unmistakable. "What you are holding," Adrian said to Sterling, "is a forgery. I know this because I have the original here, along with 12 unaltered copies of the Crown contracts that were in the process of being stolen from Stonebridge, and 11 other estates over a period of 7 years." Sterling's face had gone carefully still. "Furthermore," Adrian continued, "I have a ledger compiled by the late Mr. Henry Beaumont, a meticulous record of the redirect of Crown funds through Aldgate Maritime, a company whose ownership traces, through 3 intermediary entities, directly to you." A sound moved through the room. Not quite gasping, something more like the collective intake of breath before something large and inevitable arrives. "This is absurd," Sterling said, and his voice was still controlled, still authoritative, but the specific quality of the room had shifted around him, and he could hear it. "A dead man's papers and a disputed document." "Verified," said a voice from the door. The man Vivian had not recognized, the one who had been along the edge of the room all evening, stepped forward. He produced identification, a royal inspector, assigned to the Crown Financial Committee's External Oversight Division. He had been there the entire evening. He had heard everything. "The documents have been verified by the Crown's own registry," the inspector said. "Lord Sterling, I am required to inform you that a formal inquiry is now open." Sterling looked at the inspector, at Adrian, at Vivian, who stood at the edge of the room holding the sage-green satin of her skirt, and watching with an expression of composed, clear-eyed calm. Beatrice, at the edge of the group, had gone white. Sterling said nothing more. He was too experienced a man to make a scene, too calculating to say anything that could be used. He simply handed his forged document to the man beside him, straightened his coat, and inclined his head the precise minimum required by courtesy. "I look forward to clarifying any questions the inquiry may have," he said, with the poise of a man who had not yet fully accepted that the floor beneath him was gone. Then he walked out. The room released its breath. Lady Beatrice tried to leave quietly. Vivian reached her at the door. "You played your part well," Vivian said quietly, not unkindly. "You genuinely believed you were helping me." Beatrice looked at her. The elegance was still there, the posture, the garnets, the composed expression, but something behind it had gone out. "I believed I was on the winning side," she said. "That is not the same thing," Vivian replied. She stepped aside and let Beatrice pass. Outside, in the cold of the winter night, the carriages were being called. Vivian found Adrian standing at the top of the steps, looking out at the dark grounds. His hands were in his coat pockets, and his expression was the one she had learned to read, not triumphant, not relieved, but the particular quiet of a man who has put a thing down after a very long time of carrying it. She stood beside him. "It is not done yet," she said. "The inquiry will take months." "Yes," he said. "Sterling has resources and allies. He will fight it." "Yes. The 11 other estates will need to be contacted. Restitution is a process." "All of that," he agreed. She looked at him. "You are not worried?" "No," he said. He turned to look at her, and in the winter night, with the light from the windows behind them and the cold stars overhead, his expression was the quietest and most certain she had ever seen it. "The thing that needed to be proven has been proven. The rest is time. I have time." "We," she said. "We," he agreed. He said it simply, the way he said most things, without flourish, without qualification, with the full weight of meaning behind it. She slipped her hand into his. He closed his fingers around hers. Behind them, the Wentworth ball continued, the music, the chatter, the rearranging of alliances that would follow the events of the evening. The county would talk about this night for years. The story of the Duke who arrived in a broken carriage and turned out to be the wealthiest man in England would pass from drawing room to drawing room until it became a kind of legend. They would tell it wrong, of course. They would make it about the money. The truth was simpler and larger than that. It was about a man who had trusted the right person. It was about a woman who had been handed a book she only half understood, and had understood all of it by the end. It was about a father who had loved his daughter enough to leave her not wealth, but truth. And it was about the particular power of a person who does not need to be the most powerful one in the room to change everything in it. The world will often judge you by the carriage you arrive in, by the coat on your back, the house behind you, the number attached to your name. It will decide your worth before you have spoken a single word. But worth is not something the world assigns. It is something you live in, every quiet choice, every honest record kept, every risk taken, not for gain, but for what is right. Henry Beaumont, working alone in a failing house, compiling evidence no one asked him to compile, knowing the risk, and choosing truth over safety, that is worth it. Vivienne, choosing to understand rather than simply possess what she had been given, that is worth. Adrian, spending 3 years in patient, unglamorous preparation, refusing to let injustice become permanent simply because confronting it was difficult. The lesson is not that the wealthy always win. The lesson is that integrity outlasts convenience, that patience outperforms panic, and that the people who will stand beside you when the truth finally comes into the light are the same people who stood beside you when the carriage was broken and the coat was worn and the world was laughing. Choose those people. Be those people. The rest will follow. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going.